The long-awaited coverage of Hueco Mundo within the Arrancar arc is finally here, and my god, we have so much to talk about. This arc was genuinely the first time I had true fear for our cast of characters, and I found myself questioning how in the hell they'd get out alive. Hueco Mundo was terrifying, and so were all the Espada we were introduced to within it. Surprisingly, despite the horror of this hollow world and the constant action that took place, a new character named Nell was introduced who quickly rose in the ranks of my favorite characters within Bleach, and I am beyond excited to talk about her. If you're new to this channel and series, we're covering Bleach from a completely blind perspective of never having seen the show or read the manga. I quickly have been enveloped in this story since the very first arc, and sharing my thoughts of this beautiful and intricate story has quickly become a favorite pastime of mine. As a side note, these videos do take a lot of time to create, so if you're along for the ride, please do drop a subscription as it really helps out my channel, and guys, we are so close to 1,000. From kidnapping, fights with Espada, comedy, rescue, and goosebump-inducing moments, this is my blind review of Hueco Mundo. From where we left off last video, Aizen's interest in Urahara was piqued, and we quickly find out his true objective within her. He calls together the Espada, and we see him activate the Hyogyoku before its awakening, which he explains can only happen by briefly removing the seal when the Hyogyoku is met with someone with twice the spirit energy of a captain. Immediately, I was enthralled. We once more have confirmation of Aizen's immense strength. The stipulation of the Hyogyoku with his spirit energy being twice that of a captain added so much hype to him as an antagonist. But I have strong feelings his spirit energy being far stronger than just two captains, perhaps he's just scratching the surface. We then bear witness to the creation of a new Arrancar, and Aizen then asks Ulqiorra if he remembers his mission that Aizen assigned, and then instructs him to carry it out, which sets the stage for the action and chaos to come within this arc. Aizen's meeting with the Espada was a high point for me, and right off the bat we had another Espada who caught my eye, that being Stark. He looks incredible, and with his demeanor of apathy, he struck me as an antagonist I'd love. He seems pretty neutral and not really caring about much things at all. As most of y'all know though, currently Ulqiorra is my favorite of the Espada, followed by Grimjow, but Stark based on visuals alone became my third favorite, which is a testament to the beautifully designed characters Kubo was responsible for. Continually, I find his art style to be amazing, and it's genuinely absurd how well designed each character is within the story. During the time of Aizen telling Ulqiorra to carry out his mission, our cast of characters within Ichigo and the others were training to grow stronger. However, it's cut short when the Soul Reapers not training, rather relaxing, they encounter the Arrancar who have arrived, consisting of Grimshaw, Yami, Lupi, and Wonderless. The battle arrived far sooner than we expected, and Grimjow immediately goes to find Ichigo as a theme of him, which is the incessant desire to fight Ichigo and prove his superiority of him in combat. With the fights now breaking out, Soul Society is alerted and Rukia goes to the human world while Urahara has to go through the Dongai due to her being an obvious human. The separation immediately gave me trepidation for Urahara due to the plan of Ulqiorra currently being unspecified. Ichigo, who was also in training, refuses to remain with the Visored and instead arrives to Karakura Town ready to scrap. I had long been awaiting Grimshaw vs Ichigo Part 2 and I wasn't disappointed. Ichigo, now toting his hollow mask, told Grimjow he only had 11 seconds to finish him, which was plenty of time. In Grimjow, a fellow Chad of trash talk tells Ichigo in regards to his own missing arm that he threw it away and he didn't need it at all to beat Ichigo. Both hot-headed individuals driven in large part by impulse in their fights, the tension was palpable. Within Grimjow, the scar from Ichigo's Getsuga Tensho was still there, and I had an immediate flashback to Bond from Seven Deadly Sins bearing one single scar from Meliodas. The scar wasn't something that could be healed, it was from hell itself, which leads me to believe that Ichigo's Getsuga Tensho is a move far stronger than we know, and that he's merely scratching the surface of this ability that seems to come from hell itself. This fight was in favor of Ichigo almost the entirety of until Ichigo's hollow mask shatters moments before his victory in typical shonen-like fashion. Thankfully, due to Rukia's arrival, Ichigo doesn't die from Grimshaw's bloodthirst, but even her strength and power-ups from training isn't enough. Another savior comes in the form of Shinji, who seemed far stronger than Grimjow, which excited me for his power levels to come. Shinji seems to be the strongest of the Visored, and God knows his potential. However, this fight ends with Ulqiorra's resurrection, which interrupts all the Arrancar's fights as their mission was accomplished. The mission of Ulqiorra, as we learned, was to capture Urahara, as he does within her transport to the human world. His arrival sent chills down my spine as he seemed to fear nothing, and he carries this aura of superiority and quiet wrath around him. I felt so terrible for Orihime as she's stripped of almost all free will and told to go with Ulqiorra to become a slave for Aizen or have her friend slaughtered. Orihime, as we know, is a kind-hearted and loving individual and chooses slavery in the life of a tool to Aizen over allowing her friends to be hurt. The plan of Aizen executed by Ulqiorra sets into motion all the events of Hueco Mundo, and if we learned anything from Ulqiorra's demeanor, this arc is the highest stakes of any we've seen thus far. While all this transpired, there were other fights that took place, notably Yami versus Urahara, and Urahara again establishes himself as a top-tier fighter, quickly able to adapt to any fighting style, and that if he's attacked with something once, it'll never hit him again. Urahara's simultaneous poise and confidence yet playfulness is a dichotomy of his character and is something that builds anticipation in our minds, waiting for him to fight all out and be entirely serious. A few other fights took place, but this video would be far too long if we discuss every single detail of this long arc. There are so many fights to discuss and so many things that go on, so forgive me if I skip over anything you personally enjoyed. Orihime was granted permission to say goodbye to one person as long as she didn't reveal herself. And of course, that person being Ichigo. I found it really touching and intimate that within her monologue, she says she wishes she could have lived several lives, with several jobs, with several families, experiencing so many new things, and that despite how many lives or careers she'd live, she'd continually fall in love with Ichigo again and again. Bleach, for the first time through this beautiful exchange, reminds me of my singleness, and my God, I hope I experience the kind of love that would make someone say that about me. With this touching goodbye, Ichigo the next morning gathers with the Soul Reapers to discuss Orihime being missing. This leads to Ichigo stating that she wasn't missing because he sensed her spirit energy when she said her goodbye, which subsequently results in her being labeled a traitor by Yamamoto, who forbids the humans or Soul Reapers from going after her. He concluded she left of her own free will given she was abducted, yet allowed to say goodbye, which fits perfectly into Aizen's master-crafted plan. I had some immediate thoughts regarding this, and it made me think that Yamamoto was being short-sighted, but later on I understand what his true objective was. Our Soul Reapers don't abandon their allies, and it pains me that I was so short-sighted to think that Yamamoto didn't have any care for Orihime and would simply abandon her. The Soul Reapers in the human world then are brought back to the Soul Society, and with our human cast left on their own, we know what happens next. Ichigo sets out to save Orihime. He does this through Urahara, but to our surprise, he isn't alone. Chad and Uryu are with him too. They're here to save their friend together. No longer will Uryu or Chad play second fiddle. They've trained with the intent purpose of growing stronger, to protect. Thus, they enter Hueco Mundo as three, in fact, a dilapidated and comedic three nonetheless. They go to rescue Orihime, and within this rescue mission, all stakes are on the line. They're defying Soul Society and risking death for the sake of saving their friend. Whilst in Hueco Mundo, Orihime is requested to show her powers, and in doing so she restores Grimshaw's arm, and Aizen explains that her power is to limit, reject, and deny all phenomena, trespassing on the domain of the gods and violating the divine law. Her power we've long speculated was god tier, and we're proving it right here. We also learned that Urahara was fully aware of her power and aimed to keep her out of the battle, specifically so Aizen wouldn't go after her, which obviously didn't work. I knew there was no chance that Urahara wouldn't be fully aware of her abilities, given how smart of a character he is. At this current point, he's definitely the top of the top in terms of intellect regarding characters, him and Aizen being number 1 and 2. And I'm glad it was fully explained. I did run into a question though that lingers. How in the hell does Orihime have these abilities as a human? Where we are now in the story, it's still not really answered, but I'm excited to see when it is. After Grimmjow has had his arm restored, he reclaims his place as the 6th Espada, a moment I had long awaited. A notable scene that was brief, although I believe paramount, was the meeting of Isshin and Ryukin. They clearly have had a long history amongst each other, but I was under the impression under most circumstances that Soul Reapers and Quincy's hate each other and they don't get along. This relationship between the two of them brings up more questions as to the history of Isshin's life and why he let Ichigo stay in the dark for so long, especially knowing that one of the people he knows who's also not a regular human goes to the same school as Ichigo. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me why this was all hidden for so long, and also why would they associate with each other given the differences in being Quincy and Soul Reaper. Could Isshin have some type of connection to the Quincy? Was he an ally to them? But if so, why would he allow them to be wiped out? We're eventually taken back to Ichigo, Uryu, and Chad, who are now in Hueco Mundo, with Chad and Uryu taking the spotlight of the beginning fights, further proving their worth. These fights were fairly insignificant, but a dialogue of one of the Hollows was chilling. In response to Uryu telling the Hollow that Aizen should fear them, the Hollow responds that Aizen fears nothing and no one, which is why the Hollows flock to him. They're beings born from fear, and his fearlessness is something so rare and so dark that Hollows naturally follow him as their leader. Aizen once more rises the ranks in a daunting and dark antagonist, and I love every glimmer of his darkness. Eventually, our infiltrators reach the desert, which is the perfect aesthetic for Hueco Mundo. Relatively lifeless with eternal night and an endless space for them to traverse. Whilst going to the castle and going through Hueco Mundo, we're introduced to a trio, Nell, Pesce, and Dondachaka, who may be the most consistently humorous characters of this story thus far for me. Nell blew my expectations out of the water this arc, and she quickly became one of my favorite characters. I'm a sucker for little sister-like characters, similarly to Tama in One Piece, and I've always wanted a little sister. Unfortunately, I'm an only child, so I think that's where my bias stems from regarding characters like this. But I love her design, and I love the fact that she speaks in third person, and her obvious love of Ichigo along with her comedic elements makes her a top-tier character. I can't say this enough. Nell towards the end of this arc surprises the hell out of me, and I couldn't have predicted what happens regarding her. This trio we're introduced to became very apparent to me as the new part of our group of characters to join throughout this arc, similarly to how Hanataro was within the Soul Society. Through some at first brief lack of trust from our banded trio, they formed a team after Ichigo and the rest continually tried to protect them, and to my delight, in the distance more were added to our group. Thus came Renji and Rukia. I wanted them so badly to join Ichigo, but due to the Soul Society's mandate, I was unsure if they could, but good God, our squad of characters is finally back with a phenomenal dynamic. Rukia's speech towards Ichigo was significant. She asked him why he didn't wait, that of course they would come, that they're his friends. This dialogue, although blunt, addresses the theme of Ichigo trying to do everything on his own. He pushed Chad to the side during the Arrancar invasion and attempted to enter Hueco Mundo with no help. These allies he's made along the way aren't just side characters, they're not just allies, they're his friends, those he loves, who have every right to be part of this interaction. Rukia has always served as a guidepost for Ichigo, and I hope this conversation reminds Ichigo that he can't do everything on his own, that he needs those around him. Eventually our cast reaches Las Noches, and before going their separate ways, they make an oath to all come back alive. This then sets up all the separate fights to watch our characters go along, which reminded me vividly of the Soul Society arc during the separation they had. Thematically, this arc does parallel the Soul Society, entering a foreign territory to rescue their friend. Although similar, this arc isn't a copy. It feels unique and refreshing due to the darker elements this arc possesses, due to the sheer nature of Las Noches and Hueco Mundo. With the separation of our characters, not all were separated to Nell and I's delight. She remains with Ichigo, Pesce with Uryu, and Dondachaka with Renji. Of these three pairings, Pesce and Uryu to me was the most comical due to the continual improper name calling from Pesce. Pesce would call him anything from Ichigo to Ishida. He didn't quite get it, and I found it genuinely comedic. Whereas Ichigo and Nell, they were pretty funny, but it was more so of a brother-sister type bond, with Ichigo wanting to protect Nell at all cost. And if we know anything about Ichigo, it's that he thrives when trying to help and protect those he cares for, which as a result ensues in such amazing fights. Our princess in the castle being Orihime, she's shown by Aizen the Hyogoku, and in doing so, Orihime decides she'd be the one to destroy it, that she wouldn't just be a damsel. Although a grand ambition, where I'm at right now, that really hasn't occurred, but I'm all for her having this resolve, as it's a further step towards developing her into a strong and independent character. Within the infiltration, our cast fights against Privarone Espada, former Espada who were demoted, and there's several of these fights, but the best of them to me was Dordony versus Ichigo. I found Dordony to be a really well-designed character, and he fit the theme of what I imagined Las Noches to be. He fit the Spanish theme of this arc, which is a really unique trait of Kubo's writing. He incorporates so many other cultures than most anime and manga typically do, and as a result, there's a large cast of different demographics within characters and themes, which is a refreshing element to the story. Dordony, with his obsession to fight Ichigo at full strength, at one point shoots his Sero at Nell to provoke Ichigo, but to our surprise, she swallows it and fires back. Nell having this moment hinted at her power and that she isn't an ordinary child, and further does this after Dordony's defeat, with her saliva healing him. As a child, she possesses immense Latin abilities, and I knew right off the bat she was powerful, but I couldn't have expected the twist that happens towards the very end of this arc. Dordony, after his second defeat, is shown to be killed by the Execuas, which look awfully demonic and seem to be the cleanup crew after most battles. With the existence of the Privoron Espada, it poses the question how long they've existed and how long Aizen has been in charge of Las Noches. The timeline is a bit hazy, but due to there being members of the Espada who existed long before the current members, it implies a long timeline of Aizen's reign as lord over them. I know time works differently in Hueco Mundo and the Soul Society as compared to the rest of the human world, but I hope Aizen's long-lasting plan is more fleshed out because I'm really keen on timelines of events within stories. The others all have their own fights as well, but the one I want to discuss is Rukia's. Rukia faced the 9th Espada member, and when they fight, we see painted on the ceiling a sunny day with clouds, an homage to the Soul Society and the human world, which makes me question the humanity of Aizen. Is this merely something he enjoys visually, or does he have an attachment to the world outside of Hueco Mundo? Although unanswered, I find myself curious to this answer and whether Aizen is purely entirely evil, but it kind of seems like he is. Rukia's fight was the climax of the buildup of her and Cayenne Shiba's long history. I anticipated her backstory with him wouldn't be the sole conclusion of their tale, but it culminates within the 9th Espada possessing the very face, voice, memories, and abilities of him. This fight for our favorite character within Rukia was poignant. The mentor she loved and had to kill now faced before her, playing with her mind and her emotions. Rukia to match up with an Espada, whilst the rest had a Privoron Espada, was a moment I think that needed to happen. Although he wasn't the strongest Espada, Rukia hasn't been able to really prove herself in battle in quite a long time, or in fact really ever, and in this fight she does just that. Although on the losing portion of this battle a various amount of times and on the brink of death, she overcomes her emotions, her foe before her trauma, her damage from what happened, and we see a flashback furthering the development of Cayenne and Rukia. In doing so, we learn about the heart, that the heart isn't something in the body, but is created when you create a bond. That Cayenne's mandate to her is that she should never die alone, because if that were to happen, she wouldn't be able to entrust her heart to one of her friends and thereby continue on with living and be immortalized. With this memory, she understands that Cayenne lives within her, that although this copy of Cayenne stood before her, that this individual wasn't Cayenne, and she defeats the 9th Espada. Of the 9th Espada, this one was the one who had the most hollow form in nature, rather than the rest who we encountered who are far more humanoid. I'm sure for some Rukia haters they'd use this as a way to discredit her feat of defeating an Espada, but this moment solidified her character development through overcoming the guilt of Cayenne and understanding the true belonging and placement of her heart. That she refuses to die. Cayenne's mandate to stay alive rings true, and although on the brink of death, our Rukia Kuchiki survives triumphantly. While these fights took place, there was a dark moment within Orihime sensing Chad's defeat, and she refused to eat. This prompts Ulqiorra to say she needs to stay alive, it's her duty to Aizen, she's his property. That if she doesn't want to eat, he'd force food down her throat, and with Ulqiorra's further taunting, Orihime slaps Ulqiorra, and to my genuine surprise, he doesn't react with violence. Ulqiorra continually reinforces that Orihime is merely a tool, but perhaps I'm reading too far into this, but he really does seem to have some very, and I say very, minimal care for her well-being, although I'm likely misreading this, and instead he more so cares for Aizen's wishes, and that's why Aizen's wish is reflected in his good treatment of Orihime. Orihime's Espada-esque outfit this arc was also top tier, and I love the design for her, especially compared to the previous clothing she'd wear. Once again, I am a sucker for character design. Orihime also gets slapped around quite a bit within a questionable scene of two Frazione women before Grimshaw's eventual arrival, and his entrance was, to say the least, chaotic. Rather than using a door, he creates his own and takes Orihime with him, thereby setting up the climax to come. There were other fights that took place, Zayalapuro versus Renji, Uryu, and Don Dachaka and Peche. This fight with the 8th Espada really mirrored the hierarchy rankings of the Soul Society, with Zayalapuro being the head of research and development. I really liked his design and pink hair. For whatever reason, I love pink-haired characters within manga, like Kobe from One Piece. However, this fight goes on for a super long time, so we'll discuss first what we've been waiting for. With Ichigo trekking throughout Las Noches with our lovely Nell, and at first it seems like a fight won't break out. Ichigo states he doesn't have any conflict with Ulqiorra and that there's no reason to fight. Ulqiorra provokes Ichigo and tells him that he's the reason Orihime came to Hueco Mundo, and before a verbal response even takes place, Ichigo clashes swords with Ulqiorra. The speed of this exchange and Ichigo going from neutral to full of wrath and rage is a testament to the disdain he has for those who harms and defies his friends. This seriousness we see within Ichigo is a highlight of his character to me and a trait I love time and time again. For a brief second in this fight, Ichigo used his Hollow Mask and Bankai along with Getsuga Tensho. Ulqiorra seemed overwhelmed and defeated in this attack, but like the demon he is, he stands before Ichigo and Nell fully intact, asking if that's all Ichigo had. Thus ensues another brutal beatdown of Ichigo, similarly to how Grimmjow did to him previously, except Ulqiorra doesn't seem to enjoy it. He's all business. His Sero was incredible to witness, and along with that, his speed seems to be at the highest level within the story, and he defeats Ichigo with incredible ease. Despite Ichigo's defeat, he claims he won't back down and give up. However, Ulqiorra drives home the point that this is a power differential. He shows his tattoo of the fourth Espada, and that even if he were to win, there are 3 more powerful than him, and as a result, he'd never achieve victory. He drives home the point of Ichigo's ineptitude in face of such powerful darkness, and he has a really poignant line that Ichigo didn't meet his expectations. Did Ulqiorra have expectations of Ichigo being even stronger than he was within his new form and power? And if so, why would Ulqiorra have spared Ichigo to begin with? Perhaps Ulqiorra sought a fight with someone to challenge him, but at this point I have no clue and I'm just speculating. Ichigo, now on the brink of death, the mission to rescue Orihime seemed hopeless. However, Grimmjow arrives with the very person our cast sought to rescue, and he tells Orihime to help Ichigo. This moment solidified Grimmjow to me as a character I really admire, and not for his villainy, rather, his intentions don't seem inherently evil, rather selfish. He just wants to fight, and he wants to fight Ichigo at full strength. He wants to prove his superiority in his hierarchy within the food chain, which makes total sense later on in regards to literally living as an Adhucha beast for years. Due to Grimmjow defying orders, Ulqiorra arrives back to the scene to question why he'd take Orihime and why he'd heal their enemy, which provokes the two to clash. Ulqiorra clearly was superior in combat, but Grimmjow buys some time and seals away Ulqiorra briefly before Ichigo agrees to fight Grimmjow as Orihime heals both their wounds so they can fight all out. I wish we could have seen Ulqiorra and Grimmjow fight completely, but for the plot's sake, I see why we couldn't. Moments before the climax of the arc happens, Ichigo tells Nell and Orihime not to worry, that he'd win. And Orihime points out to Nell to soothe her concerns that when Ichigo promises something, it's not just a front, it's a vow. He speaks it out loud as a promise not only to others, but to himself. He won't lose. Grimmjow and Ichigo was peak combat of Bleach. Now 3 encounters with unsettled business, this fight to Grimmjow meant everything, and Grimmjow's vocal provocations proved to Ichigo that the fight means a lot to him as well. He continually tells Ichigo he wants to fight him at full power, that he wants to see Ichigo enraged with bloodthirst, that Ichigo didn't come to just rescue Orihime, that he came to fight, that it was a natural instinct to want to wipe out Hollows due to him being a Shinigami. Once more instincts are pushed forth in the dialogue, which makes me again think of Hollow Ichigo's speech regarding instinct, the king and its horse. I hope this theme continues throughout the story. To provoke Ichigo's full strength, Grimmjow tries to attack Nell and Orihime, which brings out Ichigo's hollow form, and Grimmjow displays his release form where he mirrors the panther he was as an Adhucha. Both cocky fighters, this fight is a slugfest, and both trade off winning the fight and seeming like a clear victor. Both as well are unable to admit they're anywhere close to their limit. Towards the end of the fight, Ichigo sees Orihime and Nell, but Orihime is terrified by Ichigo's hollow eyes, so instead of cheering on Ichigo and supporting him, she instead tremors, and this lack of belief in that those eyes are Ichigo's and not similar to her brother's, it leads Ichigo to being overwhelmed during the fight. Nell, thankfully being a phenomenal character, reminds Orihime in a poignant dialogue that Ichigo came to save her, that this power he wields is for his friends, not himself. He wants to protect everyone, that every time he uses this dark power, he exposes himself to so much evil and suffering, but he does so voluntarily, that she needed to cheer on Ichigo for him to win. With Orihime finally understanding this, she cheers for Ichigo, and the belief in Ichigo she has reminds Ichigo moments before his defeat, he can't lose. Ichigo stops Grimmjow's final attack with one hand and slashes him, saying that he was reminded that this isn't the end for him. This scene had me genuinely jump out of my seat with sheer excitement, not only for Ichigo reminding himself who the hell he is, but the sheer foreshadowing this tells of his true strength to stop Grimmjow with literally one hand. This results in the flashback of Grimmjow, and I found it really paramount in my understanding of the development of Hollows, with the nature of Gillian's being a culmination of Hollows, with occasionally one personality overriding the others, and from there cannibalizing enough fellow Hollows to become an Adhucha, and as an Adhucha, Grimmjow consumed thousands of fellow Hollows, and even gathered a following of fellow Adhuchas, with full belief that Grimmjow would be king, and become a Vasto Lordus. This exposes the mindset of Grimmjow, his incessant animalistic desire for being king of the jungle, for wanting combat over everything, throwing ideology to the side, just wanting war. And despite this moment, which seemed like defeat for Grimmjow, as we know within backstories of characters, this allows for one final culmination of battle, and Ichigo faces Grimmjow's final attack, which design-wise fit the Panther aesthetic perfectly. However, Ichigo takes on this final attack, stating he'll defeat Grimmjow, then Ulqiorra, then Aizen, and then take his friends home safely. Through this fight, seeing Ichigo's mask half cracked the majority of it, I liked the contrast of him retaining his human face with half hollow, which comes across symbolically to me as having two separate entities within him. His continual battle for control, him versus his hollow self, yet in this fight it drives home the point that he is in fact in fully control, that he won't be taken over anytime soon. In this fight, I do wish he called out the Zangetsu, however, perhaps the stakes weren't high enough to draw on the soul of his Zanpakuto like he has previously. A dialogue that took place with Halle Bell in her Fracciones stuck out to me. She said the fight she sensed wasn't like a human versus an Espada, rather an Espada versus an Espada, and to me that implied she sensed two dark forces clashing. I'm sure if she sensed a strong Soul Reaper within Ichigo, she would have pointed out it felt like an Espada versus a captain fighting. But she chose the words of Espada versus Espada, a Vasto Lord versus a Vasto Lord. This implication could be in reference to Ichigo's internal hollow and it being on par with an Espada, a Vasto Lordess. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, but this dialogue seemed oddly specific. However, in regards to things I'm likely not reading too heavily into, Halle Bell is an absolute babe, but let's not get sidetracked. This fight thus resulted in a perfect protagonist victory for Ichigo, winning this slugfest that has been in the works for dozens and dozens of episodes and chapters. After this victory, I loved seeing Nell tackle Ichigo with so much excitement that he didn't die, and it was so wholesome to see. However, despite this victory, it wasn't long lasting as the 5th Espada arrived. Thus ensues the final parts of the arc. After his arrival, the arc speeds up quite a bit. Noritora showing up was ill-timed, especially after concluding the previous fight, and he mirrored Grimmjow's love of war and fighting, continually wanting to prove his supremacy. However, outside of his personality, his history with Nell is where his character really stood out to me. Through his dialogue, we find out he's known Nell for years and that he's responsible for her split hollow mask, and states he kicked her out of Las Noches and that she was a previous Espada. This genuinely shocked me, especially due to Nell's childlike appearance and innocent demeanor, but I had to remind myself that being a member of the Espada doesn't inherently make someone evil. Ichigo, in response to hearing this news that Noritora told to shock Ichigo and the rest and have him distrust Nell, Ichigo instead doubles down like I did myself. He says he doesn't care if she was a member of the Espada, he knows Nell, he trusts her, and his desire to protect her is now more prevalent than ever. However, his strength at this state doesn't match his convictions and results in a further beatdown, but it draws out the power of Nell, and she arises from a smoky cloud as an adult and fights versus Noritora. This clear power differential was obvious, and she had an amazing scene of her hair blowing in the wind with the 3rd Espada rank on her back. Nell looks absolutely incredible design-wise, my god. An absolute insane moment, and upon retrospection, the foreshadowing of her double Sero made perfect sense. It's her ability, and she uses this in her attack versus Noritora. With Ichigo protecting her so long, now Nell will finally protect Ichigo. Soon after, we see the backstory in her history with Peche and Don Dachaka being her Fracciones, and that Nell was always a pacifist. She doesn't love war, and she doesn't like violence. Noritora, the opposite, continually challenged her and wanted to fight despite their power difference. However, through a Mickey Mouse method with the help of Szayelaporro, Noritora damages Nell and throws her and her Fracciones out of Hueco Mundo, with Nell now being a child. Despite amnesia, Peche and Don Dachaka chose to protect her, their master, all this time and grant her a life without violence, without suffering. Despite them being comedic characters, they care a lot and they just want to help Nell. Hell, I do too. Nell in this fight continually has the upper hand, and my god, she even has a transformation into a centaur, and despite how amazing this looked, it isn't long lasting as she reverts back to her human form, again a moment before victory taken away from us. In the backstory, Nelliel with her Espada uniform genuinely looked like a top 5 designed character in Bleach, and I know I'm redundant with the continual praises of character design, but there really is hardly an equal in terms of design-wise in regards to Kubo's artwork compared to other mangakas. However, before this fight concludes with Noritora wiping out our cast, another moment that made me get out of bed in the middle of the night during my binge watching occurred. Kenpachi arrives to fight versus Noritora. Not just Kenpachi, Byakuya arrives to fight the 7th Espada who aimed to finish off Rukia, the 4th captain arrived to heal our cast, and Mayuri faces off versus a fellow scientist. Within Szayelaporro versus Renji and Uryu, I found him a unique and compelling Espada with his mad scientist aura and aesthetic, along with his calculated planning of victory during fights. Renji and Uryu obviously are on the losing end of this fight, and thankfully with Mayuri's arrival, his defeat was fairly imminent. Mayuri, a previous character I didn't like that much, really took a huge spotlight in this fight through his immense and obvious intellect, along with his thorough and methodical planning. A scientist versus a scientist, which is a perfectly fitting matchup. The matchups of the captains this arc seem to mirror the personalities of their counterpart. Byakuya and the 7th Espada both being prideful, Szayelaporro and Mayuri both scientists, Kenpachi and Noritora both warmongerers. Most notably of Mayuri's fight, he had a speech on perfection. That no one should seek for that ideal. If someone was truly perfect, that'd be it. There'd be no way to progress, nothing to aim for. That a true scientist would never want perfection. It'd be anticlimactic, it would kill your dreams. The aim of a scientist is to grasp and try to solve concepts that will never reach perfection. To every day surpass those before you and grow, but never reaching that unrealistic ideal. Mayuri, despite his very unique personality, had a beautiful speech regarding this, and it's something I think is applicable to all of us. Don't strive for perfection, strive to be better every single day. I know in my Soul Society review, I said he was my least favorite captain, but I take that back completely. Byakuya and Zamari, the 7th Espada, their fight was perfectly matched up, and at the conclusion of the fight, he said the reason he will kill Zamari isn't because he views him as lesser, rather that this Espada member raised his sword towards his one pride within Rukia. This growth moment of seeing the love of a big brother was poignant, and there's been so much development from his previous cold demeanor that he possessed upon his introduction. Amongst these fights, the captains, they all followed a central theme. Upon their arrival, the captains win heavily, then they seemingly are bested and will be defeated, and in response, the captains display that the fight was in their hands this entire time, and that there was never truly a challenge. This continues for Kenpachi, and Kenpachi's fights are wonderful as always, and he remains as a steady candidate for one of my favorite captains. His playfulness during combat, along with his immense power-ups, is as always god tier, and he has such a large presence on screen and page every time he's there. Also, for him to win by literally just gripping his sword with 2 hands, it's unreal how strong he is, which makes me question how in the hell Ichigo beat him in Soul Society, but power scaling is toxic, so I'll choose to live in ignorant bliss instead. This fight goes as we expect, but another small thing that Kubo I feel intentionally has in the story is some of the moments within Yachiroh. Within Kenpachi and Noritora displaying their giant spirit energy, Orihime and Ichigo are barely able to stand due to the sheer force. However, Yachiroh is able to stand up without any difficulty and watch the battle without moving an inch. It very well could be that Yachiroh has witnessed Kenny fight enough for her to not be as affected by spirit energy, but I'm a big speculator, and I'd like to think that Yachiroh is far stronger than her appearance suggests, that she's a top tier fighter and is a lurking monster within the story. Again, just a theory, but I swear if I'm right on at least one of these theories I throw out, I'll be very happy. Noritora's release form he displayed during this fight was my favorite of the Espada we've seen thus far. His contained the most demonic aesthetic of the Espada, and it really felt like he was a devil of sorts. Demonic vibes from this villain group is something that's compelling to me in regards to the villainy of some of these characters, so I hope we see more releases similar to his. In his defeat, we see Nell have a look of sadness in her eyes, which is a testament to the loving nature of her character. Through the final flashback between them, he asks why she stays with him, and she says because he's weak. Despite the hatred Noritora harbors towards Nell, she doesn't want to see him get hurt and die. Gosh, Nell is just so wholesome. With the conclusion of this arc happening, all seemed in favor of our Soul Reapers and company, until Stark arrives to begrudgingly kidnap Orihime once more, and Aizen speaks to all those within Hueco Mundo, informing them he no longer has a purpose for Orihime, and that all those within Hueco Mundo no longer will have access to the human world. They're trapped, touting that the Soul Society military force is thereby cut in half as a result of this, and he informs them that he'll destroy Karakura Town, create the key, and that they've lost. All of a sudden, the efforts made within Hueco Mundo seemed null, that despite overcoming so many odds, they've lost. But the captains remind us once more they are prepared, and whilst Aizen enters what looks like Karakura Town, but rather is a fake, we had a moment that once again gave me chills. The captains were waiting there for Aizen. A war is about to break out and the fate of the Soul Society and the human world is on the line. Aizen then calls out to his top 3 Espada, Stark, Barangan, and Halle Bell, as we're left on the edge of our seats for this fight to begin. Urahara devising Karakura Town was something that took me a bit to wrap my head around, but a concept that once more proves his geniusness. With Aizen in the top 3 Espada in the human world, Ulqiorra remains in Hueco Mundo to protect and rule over it, thus setting up the next fight for our protagonist. Now Ichigo will need to rescue Orihime once more and fight against an even greater foe within Ulqiorra. The fights to come are something I can't wait to see, and holy hell, does that mean we finally get to see Aizen go all out. This arc was genuinely majority fighting, but there were so many important plot elements that transpired. I loved witnessing Rukia's conclusion to the guilt of Kyojin, Ichigo's unwavering resolve, and the glimpses we see of his full capabilities. The introduction of Nell, who is an honorary little sister to Ichigo, and the dialogue of Halle Bell regarding Ichigo and Grimshaw's clash. Although just speculation, I think Kubo gave us a hint of what is truly within Ichigo. With the conclusion of Hueco Mundo, I am hungering for more content, and thank God I am not watching or reading weekly because I can binge this brilliant series all I want. Now with the tease to Ulqiorra versus Ichigo and Aizen versus literally everybody, I don't think the pace of this story is slowing down, and I'm all here for it. This has been my blind review of Bleach, covering the second portion of the Arrancar arc within Hueco Mundo, and after this review, I should consider a career in commentating fights because that's what so much of this video was. Thank you all for the amazing support, and there will be plenty more Bleach videos right around the corner. These videos take a ton of effort to make, so if you haven't already, please don't forget to drop a subscription because we are so close to 1,000 subscribers. As always, my friends, be greedier.